I never expected my first-class ticket to become international news. But when Johnson Airways tried to move me to economy despite my paid reservation, they didn't realize they'd chosen the wrong black woman to disrespect. Within minutes, every plane in their fleet stopped moving. Not because of weather, not because of mechanical issues, because their own CEO grounded everything. Vivian Grant stood frozen at the threshold of the first-class cabin, her boarding pass clutched between trembling fingers. The document, crisp, white, embossed with the Johnson Airways logo, clearly displayed First Class 2A beneath her name. Yet somehow, this piece of paper had transformed from a guarantee to a point of contention. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," Allison Graves stated, her voice carrying just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "There's been a mix-up with your seating." The gate area of JFK's Terminal 8 suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Vivian became acutely aware of eyes turning toward her, curious, impatient, judgmental. The familiar knot of tension formed in her stomach, the one she'd felt countless times in boardrooms when she was the only black face present. "There's no mix-up," Vivian replied, maintaining her composure. "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 2A. First class." Allison's eyes narrowed as she glanced down at her tablet. "The system shows your reservation has been modified. I'm afraid you'll need to board through economy." A businessman behind Vivian sighed loudly. His expensive watch caught the overhead light as he checked the time. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, impatience evident in his tone. "No problem, sir," Allison responded with a sudden smile. "This passenger needs to board through the main cabin. You can proceed." The dismissal was so casual, so practiced, that Vivian momentarily wondered if she had misunderstood something. Had her assistant booked the wrong class? Had there been a legitimate system error? But no, she had personally confirmed her first-class reservation just that morning. "Excuse me," Vivian said, her voice quiet but firm. "I paid for first class. I confirmed my reservation this morning. I'd like to speak with your supervisor." Allison's smile remained fixed, though her eyes hardened. "Ma'am, I am the supervisor for this gate. The system shows what it shows. You'll need to step aside so other passengers can board." The businessman shifted his weight, moving forward as if Vivian were already gone. The subtle pressure of his presence at her back felt like a physical push. Marcus Carter, Vivian's assistant, appeared beside her, alerted by the delay. At 38, Marcus had worked with Vivian for 5 years, long enough to recognize when a situation was deteriorating. "Is there an issue?" he asked, his tone professional but carrying an edge of concern. "Ms. Grant's reservation shows she needs to board through economy," Allison repeated, glancing pointedly at the growing line behind them. Marcus frowned. "That's incorrect. We confirmed first class this morning." Vivian felt a flush of heat rise from her collar to her cheeks, not embarrassment, but the first embers of anger. She had built Inceptus Innovations from a startup into a billion-dollar tech firm. She had faced down venture capitalists who questioned her capabilities and competitors who underestimated her resolve. Now, this gate attendant was treating her as if she were attempting to steal an upgrade. "Let me be clear," Vivian said, keeping her voice level. "I am the CEO of Inceptus Innovations. I frequently fly first class with Johnson Airways for business. There has been no modification to my reservation." A flicker of doubt crossed Allison's face, but it quickly vanished. "I understand your frustration, but the system shows what it shows. If you'd like to board, you'll need to proceed to economy. Otherwise, I can help you rebook on a later flight." The businessman behind Vivian snorted softly. "Some people just don't understand how these things work," he muttered to no one in particular. That comment, casual, dismissive, dripping with assumption, was the tipping point. In that moment, Vivian felt 20 years of professional slights crystallize into perfect clarity. This wasn't about a seating assignment. This was about who was deemed to belong in which spaces. "Actually," Vivian replied, turning to face the man directly, "I understand exactly how these things work. That's why I know when I'm being discriminated against. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of appearance, hit subscribe now. What happens next will change how an entire airline does business." Forever. 12 hours earlier, Vivian Grant stood before her bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her tailored midnight blue suit. The fabric felt smooth against her fingertips an investment in her professional image that had paid dividends many times over. At 40, Vivian had mastered the art of corporate presence, the balance of authority and approachability that allowed her to command a room without seeming threatening. Today's the big one, she reminded herself, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her lapel. The San Francisco Tech Conference represented more than just another speaking engagement. It was her opportunity to announce Inceptus Innovation's groundbreaking AI ethics framework, technology that could prevent algorithmic discrimination across industries. The irony of that mission would not be lost on her later. Vivian's corner office on the 47th floor of the Inceptus Tower overlooked Manhattan. Morning sunlight casting a golden glow across the glass and steel landscape. Her desk, clean, organized, with a single framed photo of her father, reflected her approach to business, focused, intentional, without unnecessary flourishes. "Morning, boss," Marcus said, entering with 2 coffee cups. "Japanese investors are confirmed for 9. They're excited about the ethics framework." Vivian accepted the coffee, inhaling the rich aroma before taking a sip. "The framework is only valuable if companies implement it," she replied. "That's what today's announcement is about, making sure they do." By 9 o'clock, Vivian sat at the head of the conference table, facing 6 Japanese executives who had flown overnight to meet with her. The projection screen behind her displayed the Inceptus logo, a stylized infinity symbol representing endless innovation. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice confident and measured, "what we're proposing isn't just another compliance tool. It's a fundamental rethinking of how AI interacts with human diversity." For the next hour, Vivian led them through the technical specifications and market implications of her company's innovation. She noted how their eyes widened when she demonstrated the potential return on investment, how they leaned forward when she explained how the framework would protect them from liability. What she didn't mention was the personal stake she had in this technology, how she had conceived it after watching facial recognition systems consistently fail to identify black faces, how she had fought for funding when investors questioned whether bias in AI was really that big a problem, how she had persisted when competitors suggested she was playing the race card to gain market advantage. The meeting concluded with handshakes and signed contracts worth $30 million. As the investors filed out, Emilia Ruiz, Vivian's mentor and board member, stepped into the room, her expression bright with approval. "Another victory for Inceptus," Emilia said, her slight Spanish accent warming the words. "Your father would be proud." The mention of her father sent a familiar pang through Vivian's chest. Julian Grant had been her first supporter, encouraging her to pursue computer science when her high school counselor suggested more suitable careers for a black girl from the Bronx. He had worked double shifts as a hospital orderly to help pay for her undergraduate education, only to pass away during her second year at Harvard Business School. "He'd be more interested in the impact than the money," Vivian replied, gathering her notes. "Speaking of which, I need to finalize my keynote for tomorrow." "Already handled," Marcus interjected, appearing with Vivian's briefcase. "Your slides are updated with the latest data, and your talking points are polished." Cars waiting downstairs for the airport. As they rode the elevator down to the lobby, Vivian mentally reviewed her schedule. The flight to San Francisco would give her 3 hours to fine-tune her presentation. She would check into the hotel, have dinner with the conference organizers, then get a full night's sleep before her 10 a.m. keynote. What she didn't plan for was becoming the center of a corporate crisis that would make headlines across the country. The town car glided through midday Manhattan traffic, its interior a cocoon of climate-controlled quiet. Vivian used the time to check emails and review market reports, pausing occasionally to gaze out at the city she had conquered through sheer determination and brilliant innovation. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the housing projects of the Bronx to the executive suite, from being the only black student in advanced math to being the only black woman CEO in her industry sector. Each step had required twice the effort for half the recognition. Each achievement had been questioned, minimized, or attributed to factors other than her intelligence and work ethic. "You're thinking about him again," Marcus observed, noting the distant look in her eyes. Vivian smiled faintly. "His voice still guides me, you know. Whenever I face resistance, I hear him saying, 'Lindia, never let them define what you deserve.'" Lindia was her birth name, though she had professionally gone by Vivian since college. A strategic choice she had made after noticing how resumes with ethnic-sounding names receive fewer callbacks. It was one of many compromises she had made to navigate a system that wasn't built for her success at TJFK Airport. They bypassed the main check-in counters, heading directly to the premium lounge where first-class passengers enjoyed private check-in and security screening. The lounge attendant, a young white woman with a practiced smile, glanced up as they approached. "Good afternoon, Ms. Grant," she greeted Vivian by name, having recognized her from previous trips. "Your flight to San Francisco is on time. Would you like me to expedite your security clearance?" This was the treatment Vivian had earned: respectful, efficient, acknowledging her status. She had paid for it not just with the premium fare, but with years of building her professional reputation. Yet even here, in this rarefied space, she never took such treatment for granted. Experience had taught her that respect could be withdrawn without warning, that belonging was conditional. Inside the first-class lounge, Vivian settled into a leather armchair, opening her laptop to review her presentation one final time. The room hummed with quiet conversation and the occasional gentle chime of glassware. Around her, other executives, predominantly white men, conducted similar pre-flight business, their presence in this exclusive space unquestioned. Marcus returned from the bar with sparkling water for Vivian and coffee for himself. "Security's moving quickly today," he noted. "We should have plenty of time before boarding." Vivian nodded, scrolling through her slides. "I want to emphasize the practical applications more than the technical specifications," she said. "The audience needs to understand this isn't just theoretical. It's about preventing real harm to real people." As she refined her talking points, Vivian reflected on how her personal experiences had shaped her professional mission. The AI ethics framework she had developed wasn't just a product. It was her response to a world that consistently undervalued and misidentified people who looked like her. It was her way of ensuring that the digital future wouldn't replicate the biases of the past. When the boarding announcement came, Vivian closed her laptop and gathered her belongings. She felt centered, prepared, and focused on the opportunity ahead. As she and Marcus walked toward Gate 19, she had no inkling that her carefully planned day was about to veer dramatically off course. The first hint of trouble came as they approached the boarding line. Vivian noticed Allison Graves, the gate attendant, studying her with an expression that seemed oddly calculating. It was a look Vivian recognized from countless professional interactions, the subtle reassessment that occurred when someone realized the black woman approaching them held more authority than they had assumed. "Ready to change the tech world tomorrow?" Marcus asked as they joined the first-class boarding queue. "One algorithm at a time," Vivian replied, her confidence genuine. She had overcome too many obstacles to doubt her path now, when her turn came. To board, Vivian presented her pass with the casual confidence of a frequent first-class traveler. She was already mentally rehearsing key points of her keynote, planning how she would connect with the audience of tech leaders who had the power to implement her framework industry-wide. Instead, she found herself facing an unexpected barrier. Allison Graves, scrutinizing her boarding pass with excessive care, looked up with a manufactured expression of regret. "I'm afraid there's been a change to your reservation," she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You'll need to board with the main cabin." The statement landed like a physical blow, jolting Vivian from her mental preparations. She blinked, momentarily confused. "There must be some mistake," she said, pointing to the clear first class designation on her boarding pass. "The system shows your seat has been reassigned," Allison insisted, not making eye contact. "You'll need to step aside so others can board." In that moment, time seemed to slow. Vivian became hyper-aware of details: the slight curl of satisfaction at the corner of Allison's mouth, the impatient shifting of passengers behind her, the subtle change in the air as people registered what was happening. This was a familiar moment for Vivian, though it had been years since she had experienced it so blatantly. It was the moment when someone looked at her and decided she didn't belong in a space of privilege. It was the moment when her credentials, her achievements, her paid ticket were deemed insufficient to overcome the preconception attached to her skin color. What made this instance different was that Vivian was no longer the struggling student. or the junior executive who might have swallowed the insult to avoid conflict? She was Vivian Grant, CEO of Inceptus Innovations, scheduled to deliver a keynote address on algorithmic bias to an audience of thousands, and she was not moving. The difference between accepting injustice and challenging it often comes down to one moment of courage. If you believe in standing up when others are pushed aside, subscribe now. The next part of this story shows exactly what happens when power confronts prejudice. Let me see if I understand correctly, Vivian said, her voice calm but carrying a steely undertone. Despite my confirmed first-class reservation, which I'm holding in my hand, you're telling me I need to move to economy based on a system update I wasn't notified about. Allison maintained her professional veneer, though a hint of defensiveness crept into her posture. The system shows what it shows, ma'am. I don't make the assignments. Then who does? Vivian pressed. Because someone made a decision to move me from my confirmed seat. The line behind them grew restless. A white executive in his 60s cleared his throat loudly. Some of us have connections to make, he muttered, loud enough to be heard. Marcus stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Vivian and the growing tension of the queue. Perhaps we could speak with a manager, he suggested, his tone deliberately mollifying. There seems to be a significant discrepancy here. I am the manager on duty, Allison replied, her smile tightening. And I'm afraid I'll need to ask you to step aside so other passengers can board. You're delaying the flight. The subtle shift of blame, making Vivian responsible for the delay rather than acknowledging the airline's error, was a tactic Vivian had encountered throughout her career. It was the same deflection used when she pointed out bias in meetings, when she questioned disparities in funding, when she challenged the status quo in any way. The problem wasn't the unfairness. The problem was her reaction to it. I'm not delaying anything, Vivian stated clearly. I'm attempting to board with the seat I purchased. If there's a delay, it's because Johnson Airways isn't honoring its commitment to me as a customer. A young mother in line shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Two businessmen exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of impatience and discomfort. No one spoke up. No one intervened. The bystander effect was in full force. A collective decision to witness, but not engaged at Allison's radio crackled with a message from another gate agent. She listened, then looked up with renewed determination. Ms. Grant, I've been informed that your seat was reassigned due to weight and balance considerations. It's standard procedure when necessary. Weight and balance, Vivian repeated flatly. Yet somehow these considerations only affected my seat, not any of the other first-class passengers. The businessman behind her stepped forward. Look, if there's a problem with the flight, they need to fix it. I have a meeting in San Francisco this evening. Sir, your boarding will proceed momentarily. Allison assured him with a warmth notably absent from her interactions with Vivian. We just need to resolve this seating issue. The contrast was so stark that even casual observers could recognize the disparity in treatment. A flight attendant passing by slowed, watching the interaction with a furrowed brow. A young man waiting to board pulled out his phone, angling it subtly to record the scene. Vivian felt the familiar weight of being the problem that needed solving, the disruption to an otherwise smooth process. She had spent her entire career navigating these moments, calculating when to push back and when to strategically retreat. But something about this instance, perhaps its naked transparency, perhaps the accumulated weight of similar experiences, made retreat impossible. My reservation confirmation clearly states first class, she said, holding up her phone to display the email. Your system acknowledged it when I checked in 2 hours ago. There has been no announcement about weight and balance issues affecting seating assignments. I'm asking you directly, why has my seat, specifically, been changed? The directness of the question hung in the air. Around them, the background noise of the airport seemed to dim as passengers attuned to the tension unfolding. Allison's composure faltered momentarily. She glanced at her tablet, then at the growing line, then back at Vivian. I'm following protocol, ma'am. If you have an issue with our procedures, you're welcome to contact customer service after your flight. I'm addressing the issue now, Vivian countered, before I'm expected to accept substandard service based on unclear justifications. The standoff had reached a critical juncture. Either Vivian would acquiesce, boarding the flight in economy despite her paid first-class reservation, or the situation would escalate beyond this tense exchange at the gate. Marcus, sensing the impasse, made a subtle movement with his hand. It was a signal they had developed over years of working together, an indication that he was about to take action to support her position. Since this seems to be a technical issue, he said smoothly, perhaps we should involve Johnson Airways corporate office? I believe they would want to know about a system error affecting premium customers. The mention of corporate oversight caused a flicker of unease to cross Allison's face. Marcus pressed his advantage, pulling out his phone and activating the speaker function. I'm calling Amelia Ruiz, board member of Inceptus Innovations, he stated clearly, making eye contact with Allison. She'll want to document this situation. The call connected, ringing loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Amelia's voice came through, crisp and authoritative. Marcus? Is everything all right? Amelia, we have a situation at JFK. Marcus explained, his tone deliberately formal. Ms. Grant is being denied her first-class seat on Johnson Airways Flight 814 despite having a confirmed reservation. The gate agent claims it's due to weight and balance considerations, but cannot explain why Ms. Grant was specifically selected for reassignment. I see, Amelia replied, her voice cooling noticeably. Put me on with the gate agent, please. Marcus extended the phone toward Allison, who stared at it as if it might bite. Ms. Ruiz would like to speak with you, he said pleasantly. Allison hesitated, then reached for her own radio instead. I need to consult with my supervisor, she said, stepping back slightly. While Allison spoke in hushed tones into her radio, Vivian stood perfectly still, her expression composed despite the turmoil within. Years of corporate negotiations had taught her the power of silence, of allowing tension to build without relief. She could feel the eyes of other passengers on her, some curious, some judgmental, some beginning to recognize the injustice unfolding. Before them, a ground crew member approached, whispering something to Allison that caused her expression to shift from confidence to concern. She glanced at Vivian with new awareness, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Ms. Grant, she began, her tone noticeably altered. There seems to have been a misunderstanding. Before she could continue, the overhead speakers throughout the terminal crackled to life. The ambient noise of conversations and rolling luggage faded as passengers paused to listen. Attention all Johnson Airways personnel and passengers, a male voice announced, the authority in his tone unmistakable. This is Mitchell Covington, Chief Executive Officer. Effective immediately, all Johnson Airways flights are grounded pending an emergency review of our customer service protocols. Gate agents, please pause all boarding procedures until further notice. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. In the terminal, passengers exchanged confused glances. Gate agents froze mid-action, uncertainty written across their faces. Allison's complexion paled visibly as she stared at her radio, which had erupted with frantic communications. Vivian remained motionless, absorbing the magnitude of what had just occurred. In her 20 years of corporate leadership, she had never witnessed such an immediate and dramatic response to discrimination. The airline CEO had grounded every flight, hundreds of aircraft across the country, because of how she had been treated. Through the large terminal windows, Vivian could see planes that had been taxiing coming to a complete stop on the tarmac. Ground crew vehicles halted their activities, drivers emerging to look toward the terminal with confused expressions. Inside, the impact rippled through the crowds like a shock wave. Passengers pulled out phones, recording the unprecedented scene. Social media platforms lit up with real-time updates from those witnessing the event. Hashtag Johnson Airways Grounded began trending within minutes. What's happening? The businessman behind Vivian demanded, his previous impatience transformed into confusion. I believe, Marcus replied with deliberate calm, that the CEO of Johnson Airways has just made a very clear statement about the company's priorities. Allison's radio buzzed continuously with urgent communications. Her hands trembled slightly. As she listened, her eyes darting between the device and Vivian. Ms. Grant, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've been instructed to escort you to your first-class seat immediately. Mr. Covington is on his way to speak with you personally. The power dynamic had shifted completely. The same gate agent who had minutes ago dismissed Vivian's concerns now addressed her with the deference reserved for the most valued customers. or the most dangerous once the S-word spread through the terminal about what had triggered the unprecedented grounding. Passengers began to look at Vivian differently, some with newfound respect, others with resentment, but all with the recognition that they were witnessing a pivotal moment in corporate accountability. The confrontation at Gate 19 had transcended a simple seating dispute. It had become a very public referendum on how Black professionals were treated in spaces designed to exclude them, and the cost of that exclusion had suddenly become measurable in millions of dollars of disrupted operations. "I'll be happy to take my assigned seat," Vivian said, her dignity intact. "After all, that's all I asked for from the beginning." When systems of power encounter those they've underestimated, everything can change in an instant. Hit subscribe if you believe accountability should be immediate, not an afterthought. The next segment reveals how one woman's stand transforms an entire industry. Mitchell Covington moved through the terminal with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to command. At 58, he carried himself with the confidence born of decades in corporate leadership. His tailored suit and silver-streaked hair projected the image Johnson Airways cultivated in its advertising: sophisticated, authoritative, trustworthy. As he approached Gate 19, the crowd parted instinctively. Whispers followed in his wake. "That's the CEO himself. Never seen anything like this. Must be serious if he's here." Vivian watched his approach with the measured assessment of one executive evaluating another. She recognized the calculated precision in his movements, the careful control of his expression. These were traits they shared, the performance aspects of leadership that became second nature over time. "Ms. Grant," Mitchell said as he reached her, extending his hand. "I'm Mitchell Covington. I want to personally apologize for your experience today." His grip was firm, his eye contact direct, a gesture of respect between equals. The subtle shift was not lost on the passengers watching the exchange. This was not a corporate representative placating an upset customer. This was a CEO acknowledging a peer. "Mr. Covington," Vivian replied, her tone matching his professional courtesy. "This is certainly an unexpected development." "Indeed," he agreed, gesturing toward a quieter area away from the crowded gate. "May we speak privately for a moment?" As they moved to a more secluded corner of the terminal, Marcus positioned himself nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, distant enough to allow confidential conversation. His phone remained in his hand, the call to Amelia still active, ensuring every word was documented. "I received an alert about a potential discriminatory incident at this gate approximately 4 minutes ago," Mitchell explained once they were seated. "Our company has implemented a direct escalation protocol for such situations after several unfortunate incidents in the past year." The careful phrasing, "unfortunate incidents," spoke volumes about previous discrimination claims that had likely been settled quietly. Vivian noted the corporate caution in his language, the avoidance of explicit acknowledgement. "I see," she responded, equally measured. "And your standard response to such alerts is to ground your entire fleet." A flash of what might have been embarrassment crossed Mitchell's face. "That's unprecedented," he admitted. "But when I saw your name flagged in the system, I recognized you immediately. Inceptus Innovations has been on our radar for some time. Your work on algorithmic bias prevention is actually something our booking systems team has been studying." The irony was almost too perfect. The woman developing technology to prevent discrimination had herself become a victim of it within the very industry considering her solutions. "So my treatment improved once you realized who I am professionally," Vivian observed, her voice level but pointed. Mitchell didn't flinch from the implication. "That's a fair assessment," he acknowledged. "And it highlights precisely the problem we're facing. Our systems, both technological and human, failed to provide consistent service regardless of who you are. That's unacceptable." His candor was unexpected. Most executives Vivian had encountered would have retreated into defensive posturing or vague promises of looking into it. Mitchell's direct acknowledgement suggested either remarkable integrity or exceptional crisis management skills, possibly both. "The question," Vivian said, leaning forward slightly, "is what happens next. Not just for me, but for every passenger who doesn't have the benefit of corporate recognition to ensure fair treatment." Mitchell nodded, his expression grave. "That's exactly why I've grounded our flights. This isn't just about resolving your specific situation, though we absolutely will do that. It's about sending an unmistakable message throughout our organization. That discrimination costs more than inclusion. The statement was striking in its clarity. Not a moral appeal, but a business calculation. Discrimination was expensive in legal exposure, in reputation damage, in operational disruption. By grounding the fleet, Mitchell had translated an ethical issue into financial terms that every employee and shareholder could understand. You've certainly captured everyone's attention, Vivian noted, glancing around at the terminal where passengers and crew members watched their interaction with undisguised interest. What exactly do you hope to accomplish with such a dramatic gesture? 3 things, Mitchell replied without hesitation. First, immediate accountability. The employees involved will understand this isn't a minor customer service issue to be addressed with vouchers and form letters. Second, systemic review. We're implementing an emergency audit of our booking and boarding procedures to identify where bias enters the process. And third, public commitment. By making this response visible, we're binding ourselves to measurable improvement. As he spoke, activity around the gate had increased. Corporate representatives in Johnson Airways blazers had arrived, speaking urgently with Allison and other gate personnel. Passengers were being approached individually by customer service teams offering explanations and accommodations. Your approach is commendable, Vivian said after considering his response. Though I suspect your board of directors might have preferred a less costly solution. A hint of a smile crossed Mitchell's face. They might, he conceded. But having watched my company settle 3 discrimination lawsuits in the past 18 months, all quietly, all expensively, I've concluded that dramatic course correction is the more economical option long-term. This was the language of executive leadership, ROI, risk management, strategic positioning. Mitchell was framing his response not as a moral crusade, but as sound business practice. It was an approach Vivian understood intimately from her own experience navigating corporate resistance to diversity initiatives. You mentioned recognizing me, Vivian said, steering the conversation toward a point that had been nagging at her. Yet your gate agent clearly didn't. That's part of the systemic failure, Mitchell acknowledged. Our VIP recognition system is supposed to flag high-profile customers for special attention. Somehow, that system failed to identify you correctly, or the information wasn't properly acted upon. The technical explanation was plausible, but it sidestepped the human element of the equation. Technology might have failed to flag Vivian's status, but Allison's treatment of her hadn't been merely neutral. It had been actively dismissive. Mr. Covington, Vivian said, her tone sharpening slightly. Let's be clear about what occurred. Your gate agent didn't simply fail to recognize me as a VIP. She actively resisted acknowledging the validity of my first-class ticket, invented a weight and balance justification, and treated me with significantly less courtesy than other passengers. Those actions go beyond system failure into active bias. Mitchell held her gaze, neither denying nor deflecting. You're right, he said simply. And addressing that human element is precisely why I'm here personally rather than sending a representative. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, offering it to Vivian. I'd like to invite you to join a newly forming advisory council on customer experience equity. Johnson Airways needs expertise from leaders who understand both the technical and personal dimensions of this issue. Your perspective would be invaluable. The offer was unexpected, a strategic pivot from apology to partnership. It was a move Vivian herself might have made in his position. Transform a potential adversary into an ally, convert a crisis into an opportunity. Before she could respond, a notification chimed on her phone. Glancing down, she saw the first news. Alerts appearing about the grounding. Johnson Airways CEO grounds fleet after black executive denied seat, read one headline. Hashtag flying while black triggers airline shutdown, proclaimed another. The incident was already transcending their private conversation, becoming part of a larger narrative about race, privilege, and corporate accountability. Within hours, it would be discussed in boardrooms and living rooms across the country. By morning, it would be a case study in crisis management and discrimination response. Mitchell noted her attention to the notifications. The news cycle moves quickly, he observed. How we both handle the next few hours will determine whether This incident becomes a landmark for positive change or just another outrage of the week. His assessment was accurate. Vivian had navigated enough corporate communications to recognize the critical window for shaping public perception. Johnson Airways faced potential brand damage, but also an opportunity to position itself as a leader in addressing industry-wide issues. For Vivian, the incident could either become a personal platform for advocacy or an unwanted distraction from her core mission. "I believe we share a goal," Vivian said, making her decision. "We both want systems, technological and human, that work consistently and fairly for everyone, regardless of what they look like or who they know." Mitchell nodded. "Absolutely. Then let's use this moment," Vivian continued. "Not just to resolve my boarding issue, but to establish a template for how companies should respond to discrimination. Immediate acknowledgement, concrete action, systemic change, ongoing accountability." As she outlined her vision, Vivian noticed Marcus watching with approval. He had seen her transform professional challenges into opportunities countless times before. This situation, though unexpected and initially infuriating, was becoming another platform for the change she had dedicated her career to creating. "I accept your invitation to the advisory council," Vivian concluded, "with one condition. Johnson Airways must commit to implementing a bias detection system in your booking and boarding processes within 6 months. Not just studying it, implementing it." The request was bold, essentially requiring the airline to become a client of Inceptus Innovations. But it wasn't merely self-serving. If Johnson Airways adopted her AI ethics framework, it would create a powerful case study that could influence the entire industry. Mitchell considered the proposal, clearly weighing the costs against the benefits. After a moment, he extended his hand. "You have a deal, Ms. Grant. Now, shall we get you on your flight? I believe first class is where you belong." As they returned to Gate 19, the scene had transformed. Allison Graves was notably absent, replaced by a senior customer service manager who greeted Vivian with explicit deference. The passengers who had witnessed the earlier confrontation watched with varied expressions, some approving, some resentful, all attentive to the power shift they were witnessing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mitchell announced to the waiting crowd, "I want to personally apologize for the delay. Flight 814 will be departing shortly. As a token of our appreciation for your patience, all passengers will receive travel vouchers for future flights." The announcement was met with scattered applause and relieved murmurs. The crisis was being managed, the disruption mitigated. Standard corporate practice. But what happened next was anything but standard. Mitchell turned to address the gate area more broadly, his voice carrying to the dozens of passengers within earshot. "Johnson Airways failed today," he stated clearly. "We failed to uphold our commitment to treat every customer with respect and dignity. That failure reflects systemic issues we are committed to addressing immediately and transparently." The public acknowledgement, not of a generic service issue, but of specific failure, sent a ripple of surprise through the crowd. Corporate leaders rarely admitted fault so explicitly, especially not in the midst of an unfolding situation. As a first step, Mitchell continued, "I'm pleased to announce that Johnson Airways will be partnering with Inceptus Innovations to implement bias detection technology across our customer service platforms. Ms. Vivian Grant, CEO of Inceptus, will be leading an advisory council to guide these changes." With this statement, Mitchell had transformed the narrative completely. What had begun as a discriminatory incident was becoming a story of corporate accountability and progressive change. The very executive who had been discriminated against was now being positioned as a solution partner. It was a masterful pivot, and Vivian recognized it as such. This was the language of corporate damage control, the strategic redirection of negative attention. Yet the outcome, actual implementation of bias prevention technology, represented genuine progress regardless of the motivation behind it. As boarding resumed, with Vivian now explicitly welcomed to first class, she felt the weight of eyes following her down the jet bridge. Some passengers nodded respectfully. Others watched with thinly veiled resentment. All recognized that they had witnessed something significant, a moment when the usual power dynamics had been dramatically reversed. "That was quite a negotiation," Marcus murmured as they settled into their first-class seats. from denied boarding to corporate partnership in under 30 minutes. Vivian smiled slightly, though her eyes remained serious. The real work begins after the cameras stop rolling, she replied. Turning this moment into meaningful change will be the true test. As the plane prepared for departure, now running nearly an hour behind schedule, Mitchell Covington's voice came over the intercom one final time. This is your CEO speaking. Today, Johnson Airways is initiating a new standard for accountability in our industry. We failed one of our passengers. Instead of denying or deflecting, we are committing to comprehensive change. Thank you for your patience as we work to become the airline all our customers deserve. The announcement was met with scattered applause. As the aircraft finally pushed back from the gate, Vivian gazed out the window at the airport where dozens of Johnson Airways planes remained temporarily grounded, a powerful visual symbol of what happened when discrimination was assigned its true cost. Sometimes, she thought, change only comes when standing still becomes more expensive than moving forward. When we remain silent in the face of injustice, we become part of the problem. Hit subscribe now to join a community that believes in accountability at every level. The conclusion of this story shows how one moment of courage creates lasting change. 3 days after Flight 814 finally reached San Francisco, Vivian stood before an audience of 3,000 tech industry leaders. The massive conference hall hummed with anticipation, the crowd significantly larger than originally expected. News of the Johnson Airways incident had catapulted Vivian from respected industry figure to national conversation starter. I had planned to talk to you today about algorithmic bias in abstract terms, she began, her voice steady and clear through the sound system. Instead, I find myself offering a case study from my own experience. On the giant screens flanking the stage, slides displayed headlines from major news outlets. Airline CEO grounds fleet after black executive denied seat. Power move. How? One woman halted an entire airline. Johnson Airways announces industry-first bias prevention initiative. The audience sat rapt as Vivian recounted the incident, not with anger or indignation, but with the analytical precision of an executive. Identifying a system failure, she connected her personal experience to the larger technological challenges her company addressed, transforming what could have been merely a discrimination anecdote into a compelling business case for inclusive design. What happened at Gate 19 wasn't just about me, she explained. It was about the intersection of human bias and flawed systems, precisely the junction where Inceptus Innovations technology operates. When a company's booking system fails to consistently uphold customer rights regardless of appearance, that's not just a moral failure. It's an operational vulnerability that affects the bottom line. In the front row, Mitchell Covington nodded in agreement. He had flown in specifically for her keynote, a visible symbol of the partnership they had announced. His presence transformed what might have been perceived as a corporate call-out into a collaborative solution showcase. Johnson Airways' response demonstrated something crucial, Vivian continued. Addressing bias isn't just the right thing to do, it's the economically sound choice. By grounding their fleet for 90 minutes, they sent a message valued at approximately $2.7 million in operational costs. That's the price tag they assigned to discrimination. And that decision is already paying dividends in customer loyalty and brand perception. As she concluded her address, the applause was thunderous. Tech journalists furiously typed notes. Industry competitors studied her with new attention. Vivian had successfully redirected the narrative from victimhood to visionary leadership, repositioning herself not as someone who had suffered discrimination, but as someone providing the solution to it. Backstage, Emilia Ruiz waited with a tablet displaying real-time stock movement. Inceptus Innovations shares had jumped 7% during Vivian's speech. The board is thrilled, Emilia reported, her eyes bright with excitement. Johnson Airways signed the official partnership agreement this morning. 3 other airlines have requested meetings. This is becoming the industry standard faster than we projected. Vivian nodded, accepting a bottle of water from Marcus. The incident created an opening, she acknowledged. But it's the technology that will create lasting change. Emotional reactions fade, systems remain. Later that evening, in a private dining room overlooking San Francisco Bay, Vivian hosted a small dinner. The guests included Mitchell Covington, Two other airline CEOs, the chief diversity officers of three major tech companies, and a prominent civil rights attorney. The conversation flowed between practical implementation questions and broader discussions of corporate responsibility. The most significant outcome of this week isn't the partnership announcement, Mitchell observed during a lull in the conversation. It's the financial precedent. By assigning a specific, substantial cost to discrimination, the price of grounding our fleet, we've created a calculation other companies can't ignore. Suddenly, inclusion isn't just a moral imperative, it's a risk management strategy. The attorney nodded in agreement. I've been fighting these cases for decades, she said. The legal settlements for discrimination incidents are typically confidential, allowing companies to hide the true cost. By making your response public and quantifiable, you've changed the equation. As the evening concluded, Vivian found herself briefly alone with Mitchell on the restaurant's terrace. The city lights shimmered across the bay, a constellation of human innovation stretching to the horizon. Your leadership during this situation has been exemplary, Mitchell said, his tone sincere. Most people in your position would have focused on personal vindication. You immediately leveraged the moment for systemic change. Vivian considered his compliment, recognizing both its accuracy and its limitations. I've had practice, she replied finally. When you spend your career being the first or the only in rooms of power, you learn to transform personal slights into institutional improvements. Individual victories are fleeting. Changed systems endure. The partnership between Johnson Airways and Inceptus Innovations developed rapidly in the weeks that followed. Implementation teams worked around the clock to integrate bias detection algorithms into the airline's booking and boarding systems. The technology was designed to flag patterns of discriminatory decision-making, not after the fact, but in real time, before harm occurred. Meanwhile, Vivian's experience catalyzed broader industry examination. The hashtag first class while black trended for days as other black executives and professionals shared similar experiences across airlines. Congressional hearings on transportation equity were scheduled. The Department of Transportation announced a comprehensive review of airline boarding practices. 6 weeks after the incident, Vivian returned to her Manhattan office for a board meeting. The Inceptus Innovations conference room buzzed with energy as directors reviewed quarterly projections that had been revised dramatically upward. The Johnson Airways partnership had triggered a cascade of new contracts, positioning the company for its strongest quarter ever. The ethics framework implementation is proceeding ahead of schedule, Marcus reported, displaying a timeline on the main screen. Johnson Airways has already seen a 30% reduction in customer service complaints related to perceived bias. They're featuring the technology prominently in their new advertising campaign. Emilia Ruiz, beaming with satisfaction, added, "The competitive response has been exactly as we hoped. No airline wants to be perceived as less committed to fairness than Johnson. We've received partnership inquiries from every major carrier in North America and 3 in Europe." The business success was undeniable, yet Vivian found herself reflecting on the personal dimensions of what had occurred. She had experienced discrimination despite her position, her achievements, her carefully constructed professional persona. The incident had reminded her of her father's words, "Lindia, never let them define what you deserve." After the board meeting concluded, Vivian asked Marcus to clear her schedule for the afternoon. She needed time to process the transformation her company was experiencing and to reconnect with the personal mission that had driven her career from the beginning. In the quiet of her office, Vivian opened her laptop and began drafting an op-ed for the New York Times. The piece wasn't about Johnson Airways or the specific incident she had experienced. It was about the economic argument for inclusion, how discrimination cost businesses in ways they often failed to calculate, and how technology could help bridge the gap between stated values and actual practices. She wrote. Vivian reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the Bronx housing project where she'd grown up to Harvard Business School, where she'd often been the only black woman in the room. From junior coding positions where her ideas were overlooked to the executive suite where she now shaped industry standards. Each step had required persistence in the face of resistance, confidence despite doubt, vision beyond what others could see. The op-ed concluded with a personal note. The most expensive decision Johnson Airways made wasn't grounding their fleet for 90 minutes. It was creating conditions where such drastic action became necessary. By implementing bias detection technology, they're not just protecting customers from discrimination. They're protecting themselves from the costly consequences of allowing it to occur. This isn't just about doing what's right. It's about recognizing that what's right is also what's profitable in the long run. Vivian sent the draft to her communications team, then stood to gaze out at the Manhattan skyline. The city stretched before her, a landscape of possibility she had navigated against considerable odds. The incident at Gate 19 had been both infuriating and illuminating, a reminder that her work was far from complete, but also evidence that change was possible when accountability had real costs. Her phone chimed with an incoming message. It was from Mitchell Covington. Initial data from our system implementation is extraordinary. Bias flagging algorithms caught 17 potential incidents this week alone. This isn't just changing our airline, it's changing our culture. Vivian smiled slightly, appreciating both the progress and its limits. Technology could flag bias, but eliminating it required human commitment to change. The algorithms were tools, not solutions in themselves. As the afternoon light faded over the city, Vivian made a decision. The keynote she would deliver at next month's transportation industry conference would focus not on the incident itself, but on what came after, the measurable improvements, the tangible progress, the path forward. She would transform her experience from a personal grievance into a professional blueprint that others could follow. The most powerful response to discrimination, she typed into her notes, isn't outrage. It's transformation, not just of the moment, but of the systems that made the moment possible. If this story moved you to action, hit subscribe now. Join our community that believes accountability isn't optional, it's essential. Because change happens when we demand it, document it, and design systems to sustain it. 1 year later, Vivian Grant stood in the first-class cabin of Johnson Airways Flight 814, addressing a small gathering of journalists, executives, and civil rights leaders. The aircraft had been temporarily converted into a demonstration space for the official launch of the airline industry's first comprehensive bias prevention system. What began as a moment of injustice has evolved into a movement for institutional change, Vivian stated, gesturing toward the tablet display where the system interface glowed with activity. Today, every Johnson Airways employee has access to real-time bias detection tools. Every customer benefits from consistently applied policies, and every decision leaves a digital trail of accountability. Mitchell Covington, standing nearby, added, "Our passenger satisfaction scores have reached historic highs. Our discrimination complaints have fallen by 78%, and our corporate culture has transformed from reactive damage control to proactive inclusion." As journalists tested the system, asking questions about its functionality and impact, Vivian caught a glimpse of her reflection in the cabin window. She saw not just her present self, the accomplished CEO whose technology was changing an industry, but also the young girl from the Bronx who had once been told what spaces she couldn't occupy. That girl had refused to accept those limitations. And now, neither would anyone else.